I had no idea until I started to write fiction how much my nonfiction was like fiction, and then my fiction has a great relation to my nonfiction, because I'm still learning how to write fiction. I'm not sure I will ever stop learning, just as I'm still learning how to write nonfiction. But for me, it's kind of two sides of the whole, right? Every piece of fiction has truth in it, and every single piece of nonfiction, it has fiction in it. So if we think of character in a situation and with a problem, character in a context with a problem, it's exactly the same for nonfiction.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 316 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. Today, I have an interview with Johanna Rothman. Johanna is known as the Pragmatic Manager, offers frank advice for your complex problems. She helps leaders and teams learn to see practical alternatives that help them achieve more agility in their work, and we see how that is applied to authors. Now, Johanna, in addition, is also the author of 20 books and hundreds of articles, and we talk specifically about her book, Free Your Inner Nonfiction Writer, and that's coming up later in this episode. First, let's hear a word about this episode's sponsor. This episode is sponsored by my new book, Yippee-Ki-Yay, Mother! This is a book of trivia about Die Hard, and for fun, I've been doing a lot of memes lately. I'll actually include some of those images in the show notes for this episode at starkreflections.ca. But one of the memes that I shared earlier today was sort of a mock-up or a mock or a parody of one of the movie posters featuring sort of half of Bruce Willis's face behind the building, the Nakatomi Plaza Tower, which was 20th Century Fox Tower where it was filmed. And interestingly enough, this is some trivia that does appear in the book, but when they played the trailer for Die Hard, at the time, Bruce Willis was known as a comedic actor for primarily his role in Moonlighting. He had been in Blind Date, which was a romantic comedy film. And so they set up the action, the tension for the trailer, and the minute Bruce Willis's face showed up on the big screen in the movie theaters in the trailer, the audience burst out laughing. So panicked, the producers pulled his face from the poster, and it was just the building with the helicopters and the spotlights and the explosions on the top. It was only after the opening week and the opening 2 weeks where it was a gigantic blockbuster that they put his face back on, because Bruce Willis proved that he was versatile and he could do it. But in any case, what I was doing in one of the mock parody videos for promoting the book, I altered the text from the video. So it's just basically high above the city of Los Angeles, yada, 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 yada. But I, of course, modified that. And, of course, Lou Berger basically sent an audio recording of that clip, which he sent this to me, just in the midst of as I was recording this. And of course, we do want to make sure that we credit him as Lou J. LaFontaine Berger. And that's because he was, of course, doing a Don LaFontaine-esque intro. And that's what you're going to hear just before the bumper.
High on his love for a modern classic action-adventure film, one man who has watched the film hundreds of times has decided to write a book of trivia and behind-the-scenes tales about it. And, desperate for book sales, he keeps making parody-style memes. He's alone, retired and doesn't stand a snowball's chance in hell of selling any copies of his book. Mark Leslie, sell hard.
And that is it for the introductory matter. I'm going to forego comments. I'm a bit of a time crunch, as this is just the next several weeks are absolutely chaotic for me, but I want to get the episode out. I'm going to Colorado. I'm doing my master's in publishing at Western Colorado University, and I fly out tomorrow. I fly out the day that this episode goes live, July 28th, Friday, July 28th. I'm there, and then I go directly to When Words Collide conference in Calgary. I'm home for a couple days, then I'm off to Digipalooza in Cleveland, which is a fantastic conference specifically organized for librarians by Overdrive. I'm going to be there pitching draft to digital authored books in a catalog that I will be picking up from the printers the day before I leave for Cleveland. And then shortly after that, Liz and I are hosting the Aurora Awards, Canadian Science Fiction and Fantasy Awards. And so we have a lot of work to do for that. Just earlier today and yesterday and the day before that, etc., I have been working with some of the folks who are presenting for that and getting them to pre-record their introduction of the categories and the nominees. And of course, I'll get the ballots from Cliff, one of the organizers of the Aurora Awards, and we'll be opening the ballots live. And I'll try to include a link to that live event. This will be the third year in that Liz and I have hosted, or actually I hosted myself one year. Liz joined me in hosting it last year, and we're hosting it again this year as we do a retrospective of Canadian Science Fiction Literary Awards, which we're going to have a lot of fun with that, especially that opening bit that we did sort of like Billy Crystal style. Well, not high production as Billy Crystal, but still a pretty phenomenal production that Liz did prior to last year's. Last year's the gimmick was they pretended that they had Ryan Reynolds, Canadian Ryan Reynolds was supposed to host it. He had to drop out at the last minute. So there's me in my underwear reading The Canadian Mounted, of course, one of my books, when I get a call from Cliff saying, Mark, can you host the event later today? And so you see me scrambling to clean up my room and shave and get ready, get my tux on, etc. And then, oh, Mark, we need a co-host. And so then it shows me begging Liz to join me. And anyways, so we're going to be doing some sort of retro-themed intro for the award ceremony this year. But there you go. See, I said I wasn't going to do a long intro bit, but I did. Shame on me. But let's get down to business. Let's get into this fantastic conversation with Johanna Rothman. Johanna, welcome to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Thank you so much. I am delighted to actually talk in real time with you.
Real time. It's been a while since we've had that real time pleasure, hasn't it? I mean, I'm worried because of the pandemic and stuff. I'm afraid to count the years. So
let's just not. Let's
better to count the years we've known each other, because that's a much more fun number, right? So
yeah,
awesome. Yeah. So I mean, you do so many things, right? Creative writing, nonfiction, creative writing as well. But I want to before we get into the topic at hand and one of the books that I think we want to focus on today, for my listeners, can you just give a little bit of background? So who is Johanna Rothman? And let's describe Johanna's writing life.
So I in my professional bio, I say to people on the quote Pragmatic Manager, because that's the name of my nonfiction newsletter. Right. My product development nonfiction newsletter. I've been a consultant for 30 years. I have, those of you who are listening can't tell, I have the gray hair to prove my age.
And if I had hair, it would prove it too.
Yeah. And I am not a natural writer. I only started to write because I became a consultant. Really? I keep reading about all these people who, I had a pen the day I came out of my mother's womb. No, No, I might have had a book to read,
Okay.
but not a pen.
You came up with a business plan when you were at the womb, right?
No, not even
Listen,
that.
here's how it's
So,
going to be in the nursery.
well, I kind of have that personality. Yeah, fine.
The pragmatic toddler, you probably were.
Yeah. And I only started to write in 1997 when
Really?
I realized that just speaking was insufficient for marketing my business as a consultant. So
Okay.
I'd been inside the organization for years, right? Almost 20 years by then. And I realized if I really want to get known as a consultant, I really better start writing,
Right.
and more than one article every 6 months.
Right.
So I started to write, and I think you knew Gerald M. Weinberg. I think you knew Jerry before he died. I studied with him for several years, and he actually said to me, "You have a lot of stuff to say, but you gotta just put part of it into any given article.
Right.
So maybe you should write more often with less stuff in it." And I thought,
Oh.
oh, that's a really good idea. And I took one of Jerry's writing classes early on, probably in 98 or 99. And then I really got started with my writing. So I have my nonfiction kind of professional books. And then I write my blog on jrothman.com.
Yeah.
I also write a personal blog on createadaptablelife.com, because I'm one of those people that had a problem, right? All of us have problems. I had an inner ear hemorrhage in 2009, which left me deaf in one ear and with permanent vertigo. So I use a rollator to get around. You've seen me with a rollator.
Yep.
With a rollator, I'm pretty fast. Not as speedy as all of you tall guys with your long legs. I still have short legs.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm not as speedy as you are, but I get around. I travel the world because I'm still a consultant. And so I have these, the more kind of professional writing, the creative essay writing. And in 2016, I started to write short stories. So I've been writing short stories and yeah.
Wow, okay. Because I mean, when we met, I just knew you as a creative fiction writer and found out about your business side in this 30 years of consulting. It was like, oh yeah, I also do this. Wow.
Well, so I mean, you and I have some similarities. You write everything because I suspect you read everything.
Right. Yeah.
I also do the same, right? I read all the genres.
Yeah.
I write all the genres.
That's amazing. So, wow, this is amazing, and it's funny because I knew you as a writer at the at the West Coast workshops where we interacted, and it was always about the creative writing and the fiction and the speculative fiction and the various genres, right? The popular genres, more or less, and then learning. Oh my God, you've written how many business books? How many books about the pragmatic aspects of that because of that consulting background? Because you work with. So what I'm curious to dig into is, working with various companies and leaders and helping them with their business, and then how that applies to writers, because that's the one thing we always forget is, yay, creativity. What do we do? How do we market? But the fundamentals are still there, and it's critical. And I love the way that you're able to draw the connection because you also wear that creative writer hat.
So I'm a well-known name in the Agile community, which if any of your listeners understand anything about software development, the Agile practices, the Agile philosophy it only supposedly started in 2001. Some of us have been practicing it for a lot longer. Because it was the pragmatic thing to do.
Like ebooks. Ebooks really didn't take hold until they were 40 years old, right? Life begins at 40.
Right.
And so Agile was probably hanging out in the 70s and 80s and stuff.
Well,
It didn't become a thing until I remember first encountering it in the early aughts. But that's when it probably
yeah,
became popular, right?
yeah, yeah. So, so I'd been doing stuff like, it was not exactly the agile approaches we have now,
Right.
but it was as agile as we could be back then.
Yeah.
And so for writers, so one of the things I keep making the connection in my mind, so thank you for asking me about this, is that the more we write a little bit and the more we reflect on it and actually publish it, right? So blog posts, for example, do not have to be long.
Right.
She says to herself, because she's been writing 1,000-word blog posts for too long.
It's Jerry's voice in your ear, right? Just kind of whispering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Make it shorter, Johanna. Less stuff. Okay. But we don't have to write something long for it to be useful. Right. And the more often we publish something, the more likely we can determine if somebody else finds this useful, which means if they find it useful, we can write more about it. Now, I'm talking about shorter pieces and nonfiction, not so much fiction, because fiction, I think, really needs to be finished for some variety of finished. Right. Although you can always take a short story and make it a novella. You can always take a novella and make it a novel.
Right. So I want to dig in. So this is going to jump right into the book we're going to talk about. So the book we're going to talk about is Free Your Inner Nonfiction Writer. And I want to dig in to the very first chapter of the book, which is called Write to Think and Learn. And it almost sounds like what you just talked about is something that you apply to get people started, right? When they pick up the book. So what do you mean? What do you mean by write to think and learn? He pitches the softball down the middle.
So you and I are both professional speakers, right? And if I have even a picture of something on a slide, I can wave my hands. I am extremely good at saying anything at all about the words on the slide or the picture on the slide. It does not matter.
Right.
Notice all that hand waving.
Yes.
That's not the real intent of what I need to say.
Right.
So while I realize that and speaking is partly content and partly performance.
Yes.
If I really wanted to get into the depth of everything and help people think about one thing they could change, I really needed to write it down, and not writing words on a slide, but write paragraphs.
Right.
And sections and blog posts and articles. And so that's where I realize what I don't know as I start to write. And what I want my readers to know as I start to write. So do they need to know the same thing I know already, or am I exploring as I write? Either way.
Write about it yet, or I'll know once I start or begin the process or finish the process or somewhere in between, right?
Well, I often have, well, you know me, I have an opinion about anything at all. And I'm not afraid to share that opinion with anybody at all. So I always have an answer, but it's often incomplete, right? So you asked me about the strategy before with kind of writing small chunks and publishing them. Yeah. One of the things that my clients do is too many of them try and plan for a year or 2 or 3 or 4. I don't know anybody who can actually plan that long and keep the plan. Okay. So when I say that writing is about thinking and learning, and they experiment with the writing because they often need to influence somebody else. And then when especially these senior leaders start to write, they say, oh, I know I want to get to that outcome, but I don't know all the writing that needs to lead to that outcome. And those of you who are listening on the podcast feed, which is how I listen to this podcast, I just made my one hand go in one place and the other pointer finger went in many different directions, all to achieve that one place.
That is an amazing. I mean, that's sort of a visualization of what's happening in the mind, right? When you concrete. What is the value of that? I mean, it almost feels like I'm going to try to bring it back to fiction writing, even though this is about nonfiction writing. In particular, this particular book is the sprints, where you just kind of go, well, I'm just gonna write for 20 minutes and see what happens. Is it the same sort of thing as I'm just gonna write about this topic, and I'm gonna explore this one aspect in this piece and see what I think about it? Is it almost like that sort of warm-up exercise, or that sort of let's get into it?
It's exactly that. Yeah. And I actually recommend writing in 15-minute chunks for nonfiction, because I find I need to cycle more often, and I need to cycle to keep it clean and to clarify what the heck I was trying to say.
Is it sometimes, do you surprise yourself when you begin that process and you're like, oh, I thought I was going to say this, but once I got into it, I said that thing?
I often surprise myself. Yes. I don't always end up totally opposite, but I have a much deeper understanding of the topic, and that allows me to empathize with the people who are doing it wrong. Right. So we do a lot of things that are kind of crazy when you look at them from the outside, right? I mean, product development, high tech, all that stuff.
Yeah.
We are some of our decisions are not really rational.
Yeah.
And if you lead somebody through all of the pieces of their decision making, then they can say, oh, that's why that doesn't really work. Right. Now I get it. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's the same way for me.
Okay. I love this. I want to talk about specifically this book, who it's for, and why, right? Because one of the things you talk about, one of the chapters in the book is the ideal reader. So obviously you must have had an ideal reader in mind for this. Who is your ideal reader for this book?
So anybody who needs to write nonfiction to make a point to somebody else. So it's often, I thought of it first as for consultants. I just led an in-house workshop for a very large organization, certainly a Fortune 50 company, with their inside technical leaders, because while these people were very sharp, they did not understand several points about how do you bring in even more senior leader into your writing. How do you make your writing good enough so you can persuade somebody of something else? So I do this as in-person work, well, not in-house workshops, and mostly consultants and people who want to blog more often and make it not be so painful.
And I guess one of the things people think about when they think about business blogging is, I mean, you say the word and all of a sudden people are like, oh, I'm gonna have a nap. But how do we keep it interesting? Is it the chunks? Is that one of the strategies? What are some of the other ones?
So I think a lot of the other ones are making it personal to your ideal reader. Tell stories. I often I have stories in the book, and so that's an example of it. But often, when I write, I was going to say stories. When I write articles for other people's websites, I often start with a story. Franny, a project manager. Sally, a senior leader. Peter, a product owner. Right, all these people who have, and that allows my reader to say, I know somebody just like that. Okay. And so they're as clueless as this person.
I love that idea, because you're immediately putting them in a position where they can see themselves in relation to this person. If they don't relate to the person, they relate to someone who they know who's like that, or has been in that situation.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
and that's why when I think in my career as book selling, some of the most successful nonfiction books out there, now I'm going to use a Canadian example. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but it's called The Wealthy Barber. And it was about money management. And again, it's this story about this barber. Well, obviously they don't make that much money. And yet, how did he become so rich? What did he do? Put aside 10%. I mean, it's a standard knowledge of how to save money over time, but told through the story of this barber, this local guy, which is a fictional complete, like, I don't know. It almost feels like the most successful way that you can convey something that you want to impact and help someone learn is done through story. And so you're leveraging that stuff that you do well in fiction into your business.
Oh, absolutely. And I had no idea until I started to write fiction how much my nonfiction was like fiction, and then my fiction tent has a great relation to my nonfiction, because I'm still learning how to write fiction. I'm not sure I will ever stop learning, just as I'm still learning how to write nonfiction. But for me, it's kind of two sides of the whole, right? Every piece of fiction has truth in it, and every single piece of nonfiction it has fiction in it. Because I always anonymize the people. I'm not going to say Freddie, the guy I met in 1978 who was an idiot. I'm not going to say that, right? But I might use Freddie, but it will be in a different context, right? So if we think of character in a situation and with a problem, right? Character in a context with a problem, it's exactly the same for nonfiction. Totally.
Wow, that's amazing. So I want to explore your just as a writer, as opposed to the businesswoman and consultant who helps other business owners and leaders, etc. In terms of the writing itself, inspiration's a thing we talk about, right? So you're like, oh, okay, I need to write a story about whatever, and then you're waiting for inspiration. What's that difference between that writing fiction, where maybe potentially you're waiting for the muse to float in, and that nonfiction piece, or are there more similarities than differences there?
Well, first of all, I don't wait for any news. Insert an expletive there in that little pause. No waiting allowed. Butt in chair, hands on the keyboard, start to write, even if I have to start with blah blah blah. So I learned this actually from Jerry years and years ago, and that's one of the things I teach in my workshops and in the book, that if people say, I don't know how to start, I offer them prompts. And then I say, set the timer for 15 or 20 minutes, whatever it is, start writing blah, 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 blah. And I really hate writing blah, 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 because it's kind of boring. I mean, how many times can you write blah, blah, blah? But the idea is you never lift your hands off the keyboard. And eventually you will start to write about a person in a situation with a problem. And that right there heads you off in either fiction or not. I mean, I always know which one I'm going to write right now, but yeah.
I love that. That applies perfectly to fiction and nonfiction. A person in a situation with a problem, like, that's universal, right? Yeah, I love that.
Yeah,
and it's simplified it, right? Wow. Person in a situation with a problem. So let's take your this book as a perfect example. Is somebody who wants to write a nonfiction. I'm a person who wants to write a nonfiction book, and I don't know where to get started. Is this the kind of book I need to pick up?
This is a kind of book for getting ready to write the nonfiction book. Okay. You could write a nonfiction book just from this. I don't have all the tips in there about how to title chapters, about how to look for ways to make this even better. But you could take this book and write a nonfiction book. But the problem with a nonfiction book is it's not just writing the book, it's the same with fiction, right? It's all the marketing afterwards.
Right.
And if you don't know how to write a blog post, if you don't know how to write articles, you are never going to be able to market your book.
Right.
So, because nonfiction has it all over fiction, I can use content marketing forever to market any of my books, and I do. So and that's why writing for me is so powerful, right?
Right.
As soon as I write something about any of my previous books, it's totally fine.
Okay.
So I really, it's very, very easy.
So let's dig into the one of the sections of the book is to write fast to write well. Is that
Yep.
sit down for 15 minutes, blah blah blah? Is that part of that?
Oh, absolutely. The worst, when a lot of writers come to me and say, writing is so hard for me. I feel like it's blood, sweat, and tears. It's like trying to crunch rocks and all these other metaphors. And I ask them, how often do you interrupt yourself with editing? Well, my English teachers, I stopped them right there.
Okay.
I said, how many articles or blog posts did your English teachers ever write? And they say, that's a really good question. I say, I can tell you the answer is 0. They never wrote an article. They never wrote a blog post. They wrote other stuff. And maybe they even wrote a dissertation, I don't know how, for their advanced degree. But no, they never wrote for commercially viable, a commercial audience.
Right.
And so if you want to write for a commercial audience, you got to stop interrupting yourself with editing. And the best way I know to do that is to write fast, write in this 15-minute chunk, 20-minute chunk, whatever it is, and then keep writing without interrupting yourself with editing. And the more you write fast, the more you realize what you learn, right? You're thinking and learning as you write. So when you go back to cycle, then you say, oh, that's what I know. Now I can clarify, because I sometimes use the wrong words. I often put things in the wrong order. Right. And that's totally fine. So I can switch out sections, but I'm not editing the words. I'm clarifying the ideas.
Oh, I like that.
Very
yeah,
different.
and then you start to chip away at what it really is. Cut some of the fat, add some extra pieces that you didn't realize. So later in the book, after you've gone through some of this process, after you've done some of the editing, just enough, you've got the choose the feedback you want. I want to explore that a little bit. What do you mean by that? Choose it. So, guys, I'm only going to listen to people who like me. What do you mean by choose the feedback you want?
No, so nonfiction writers have exactly the same problem that fiction writers do. We want to be loved, universally adored. We want everybody to love our stuff. And as soon as you put something out, somebody's going to read it the wrong way. I mean, they just are, even if you were really clear. And so the real question is, when do you ask for feedback from colleagues, from friends, or from the rest of the world? And I am of the opinion that the more you write and publish, the less often you need to ask for feedback, because you will learn about your stuff. Right. And if you're writing for somebody else's site that has an editor, I have had really great editors. I've had editors who wanted to write the thing I was writing.
Yeah.
I don't like working with those editors, because one editor actually added back in passive voice. Well, your sentences are too short, she said. That's my style. That's my voice, right? You can hear that in what I just said. That's my style! Exclamation mark. That's my voice! Exclamation mark. I love my exclamation marks. And don't get me started on end dashes and commas. I will take editing for commas. I leave all my em dashes in. I love them. So I write the way I talk. Now I had to learn how I actually spoke in order to write that way. That's fine.
Yeah.
But so, and I have taken feedback, but especially with Grammarly and Pro Writing Aid now, they want to homogenize everybody's writing. Don't do that.
Yeah,
Right?
I mean, well, and it almost like this just kind of goes to the AI discussions. You're like, yeah, thank you. I will take that under advisement. And I may accept some of it and I may reject some of it. And it's my style. Therefore, piss off. So, you know, like, but that's and that's the same thing with a human editor, is there are things I was like, yeah, I get it. I know it. This is the rule. But in this particular instance, I'm going to not listen to you because I want it to look that way, or I want it to feel that way, or yes, and exactly that's why I did it. I wanted the reader to stop.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So, I mean, Grammarly really wants me to put all these sentences together.
Yeah.
I happen to write, as a nonfiction writer, I especially want to keep my reading ease high, my readability high, right? If I could write for a 7th or 8th grade audience all the time, I would.
Yeah.
And most of my books are closer to 8th or 9th grade, each chapter, but I really try, I want to make the books accessible. And if you make all the words in the sentences too complex, nobody reads it. Well, they say they read it.
Yeah.
I have some examples like that of really pivotal books in my field that I cannot read more than 3 or 4 pages at a time. And I want to know what this book says because it's too hard to read.
Yeah.
It's just too hard.
Like, let's get to the point here. Let's stop trying to impress me with your language skills. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I want to go back to adaptable life, because we started talking about that. But what I would love for you to do is I would love you to tell me a story about adaptable life and how this can apply to living an adaptable life, since that is, you know, obviously the name of one of your websites and the whole theme around it.
So I ask a question of the week every week. Well, sometimes I just write the newsletter with a question in the title.
Right.
But I read a question of the week every week because I find that if I challenge myself and my thinking, I am much more likely to be adaptable. And we need so much more adaptability and resilience in our lives, in our work, in our schools, in our governments. Don't get me started on US society, right? You live in very nice Canada, which probably has enough adaptability. Okay, maybe not.
We've adapted way too much of what's going on down south, unfortunately.
Yeah, sorry. We're a bad influence on you.
The large neighbor to the south has a major influence on us, so we just apologize a lot more. That's all.
Yeah, we're just nuts here. So, and I think a lot of us get stuck in, we've always done it this way.
Yeah.
And we always must do it this way. Even the go back thinking, right? We must go back all to in-person work. Well, I wrote a book about geographically distributed teams before the pandemic.
Really?
Because we have always had geographically distributed teams, even if they have been in one building. Because if they're on different floors, people don't go and ask each other questions.
That's true.
So, yeah. So let's not think we have to go back to what we had. Why can we not go forward to something maybe better? Now, is it always going to be better? No. But that's the point of experimentation. If we start to experiment and focus on our adaptability, we are much more likely to get to where we want to be. There's this really interesting book called Obliquity by a guy named Hay, Hay. If I could remember his first name, I would tell you. At the end of this, I'll send you a link to the book. But the idea of obliquity is often we see where we want to get to, right? We see this place we want to get, and we see we're at point A, we want to get to point B. And so we think the fastest way is a direct line, but often the fastest way is this curvy, indirect way, because we have to explore and understand along the way. And the more we understand that obliquity is actually a good thing, that we don't have to be straight on ahead, right? We're going to crash into that thing. Instead, that detours might actually help us understand what we really want and how to get there. So create an adaptable life is really about how can we use all of our questioning, and how can we create a new reality that works maybe even better than our old reality.
Oh my God, that is fantastic. Thank you for the recommendation as well, and a great story, of course, that really inspires. For my listeners who are interested in learning more about you and all the awesome things that you're doing, whether it's the nonfiction stuff, the consulting, the fiction stuff, where are some of the links where people can find out more about you?
Well, everything is on jrothman.com, JROTHMAN.com. And you can tell I got my domain name back in the 90s because it was good enough to have a first initial and last name then. And I'm very fortunate. I chose the right parents who gave me a very unique name. So I've just been really lucky. Create Adaptable Life is my question of the week, and all this really different kinds of thinking site. So everything is there.
Awesome. So Johanna, one final question before we close, and this is for the writers who are listening to this podcast who are maybe near the beginning of their journey and they're just overwhelmed, confused, not sure what to do. There's so much advice coming into them. What's something that you would want to say to them to sort of help prop them up and encourage them?
So write every single day for at least 15 minutes. Finish something, publish it. Awesome. Don't worry about the rest of it. Just write, publish, write, publish, write, publish.
And you're saying like you can put that on a blog, you can share it on some sort of social media site, something like that. It doesn't have to be, I have to find a publisher, I have to self-publish it. It could be like,
oh no,
publishing. Yeah, just getting the words out there, just going through the experience, because that maybe helps. Yep. Maybe just helps with the motor memory? What does that do?
So I think that it frees us really to write more. So if you're a nonfiction writer, if you can, write a blog post every day, at least 3 times a week. Okay. And if you're a fiction writer, write a short story every week. I mean, what have you got to lose? Even when I totally mess up with my stories, well, when I think I've messed up with my stories, somebody likes it. Yeah. I'm always so surprised by that. And in both kinds of writing, my information flow isn't always perfect.
Right.
Don't worry about it. You're not going to be perfect, and people are going to misread what you write. So what have you got to lose? Write something and publish it.
Awesome. Johanna, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation. Always great to get a chance to chat with you. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Two of the takeaways that I got from re-listening to this conversation with Johanna was, first, that importance that she talked about when working with editors, human editors, when working with systematic programmable AI like Grammarly, Chicago Manual of Style. Yes, we have editors. Yes, we have all of these tools at our disposal to refine and clean up and polish our writing. But we don't want to polish it so much. We don't want to clean it so much that it's homogenized. It could be anyone's voice. And that's an important lesson, I guess, because it's something I put into my trivia books, the nonfiction trivia books about Die Hard, planes, trains, and automobiles, and the ones I'm working on for the future. But it's also something I put into my novels. That voice is really important. And I just want to express, as I have before, that value and the importance of doing that. It may be one of the reasons why people turn to your writing, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, because they like your voice and they appreciate that voice. I can tell you right now, my friend Sean Costello can pretty much write anything. It doesn't matter what it is, what genre it is. I will love it. That's something I really enjoy about Stephen King's voice, as well as that he just the way he writes just speaks to me, and it works really, really well. I'm just in the process of going through and editing and laying out Death Drives a Semi by Ado van Belkom, a brilliant writer. Love Ado's writing. I particularly adore his short fiction, and Death Drives a Semi is a collection of his short fiction that was originally published 25 years ago, and I'm releasing it. 25th anniversary edition, special edition with author notes and an additional story and revised content, and that's coming out in the fall of 2023. But again, just a reminder of why I love his voice so much. So that's the first thing. The second one, and I did read the book that Johanna had recommended, Obliquity by John Kay. Now, actually, I'll be honest with you, the text from John Kay was harder to read. It was a lot more fun, a lot more fascinating listening to Johanna talk about it and share that. But it was a good read. But when she talked about how detours, which is the point of John Kay's book, how detours might actually help us even better than the original plan. And I think about the various times and moments in my life where I didn't go according to plan A. It had to go according to plan B, or sometimes plan C, or D, or E, or F, etc. You get the point. Sometimes those detours, how sometimes those things that take you away from where you thought you were going to go can be valuable. Whether that's an outline that you originally crafted, but then in the midst of the writing you veered in a whole entirely new direction. Whether it was with the project itself that you were working on, whether it was personal life moments. I can think of all kinds of personal moments and moments in my writing career and my writing path where the detours actually worked out better than the plan. So be open and adaptable to, as Del Griffith in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles says, to go with the flow like a twig on the shoulders of a mighty stream. How about you? What was something that you found intriguing as a takeaway from that interview with Johanna? I'd love if you share that with me. You can share it over at starkreflections.ca in the comments. I will get to sharing comments in an episode, probably not for a few weeks at this point in time because I'm so pressed for time, but I do love to hear your comments. You can at me. I'm still on Twitter or X marks the spot, or X Parrot, or whatever the platform is that Elon Musk seems hellbound to destroy. I'm at Mark Leslie over there until the bitter end, I guess. But again, and I even had folks leaving comments over on YouTube, and I appreciate that as well because all the episodes are streamed over to YouTube. But that is it for the reflection. Thank you so much for listening, and a huge shout out and thank you to all of those who support this podcast over at patreon.com/starkreflections. This is the end of episode 316. Until next week and next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.
Nope.
Oh, I know. You just go with the flow.
Like a twig on the shoulders of a mighty stream.